Iran strikes Tel Aviv. For decades, the Middle East has been the epicenter of simmering conflicts, proxy wars, and shifting alliances. But what we are now witnessing is not just another skirmish or a retaliatory strike. It is the unveiling of a new strategic chapter, one that fundamentally changes the balance of power in the region. And that should force us, whether in Washington, New York, or Berlin, to ask, what does this mean for global politics, for economics, and for the very stability of the international order? Iran's bold move to directly strike Tel Aviv marks a watershed moment in the geopolitics of the Middle East, and it is impossible to overstate the significance of this development. For years, Iran's posture in the regional conflict had been framed through proxy wars, covert operations, and indirect engagements. The Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and militias in Iraq and Syria have served as Iran's long arm in confronting Israel and the United States. But what we are now seeing is Iran discarding that buffer, stepping into the arena with its own hand, and saying to the world, we are no longer content to fight from the shadows. That in itself is not only bold but transformative. It redefines the nature of the confrontation and forces Israel to face a direct adversary that has always been treated as a distant threat rather than an immediate one. When Tel Aviv, the beating heart of Israel's social, economic, and political life, comes under fire, the message resonates beyond explosions. It is a demonstration of capability, one that undermines the myth of absolute security that Israel has carefully cultivated. Think about the psychological shift this causes. A city that Israelis believed to be untouchable has suddenly become a battlefield. For decades, Israeli citizens have lived with the reality of sirens and shelters, but this has been largely confined to the peripheries, Ashkelon, Sderot, or towns closer to Gaza and Lebanon. Tel Aviv, by contrast, has symbolized normalcy, the hub of modern life, global business, and cultural vitality. By striking at this core, Iran is not just firing missiles, it is firing into the Israeli psyche, challenging the notion that daily life can continue untouched by regional conflict. That shock, that rupture in confidence, is more powerful than the blast itself. The boldness of this move also lies in its defiance of Israel's advanced defense systems. Billions of dollars, much of it American, funded, have gone into building layered defenses, the Iron Dome to intercept short-range rockets, David's Sling for medium-range threats, and Arrow systems for long-range ballistic missiles. These systems have been hailed around the world as marvels of modern military engineering, the gold standard of defense technology. Yet here we are, confronted with images of missiles striking Tel Aviv. The symbolic weight of that cannot be ignored. Iran has proven that no defense is foolproof, that technology can be outmaneuvered, and that the aura of invincibility can be shattered with a single strike. For Israel, this is not only a military challenge, but a political crisis. If the public loses faith in the very systems designed to protect them, pressure mounts on leadership to retaliate, escalating the cycle of violence. The timing of Iran's move is no less significant than the act itself. This strike comes at a moment when the region is already on edge, with ongoing unrest in Gaza, mounting tensions with Hezbollah on the northern border, and domestic divisions within Israel itself. By choosing this moment, Iran amplifies its leverage. It exposes Israel's vulnerability at a time when it is least prepared to project unity and strength. That is not a coincidence. It is strategy. Iran is signaling that it is capable of reading the political landscape and exploiting fractures within Israeli society. In warfare, timing is as decisive as firepower, and Tehran has demonstrated both. Moreover, this direct strike shifts the burden of response squarely onto Israel. Until now, Israel has enjoyed the strategic luxury of responding to proxies while keeping Iran at arm's length. That distance allowed for a measured, calibrated response, often short of full-scale escalation. But with Tel Aviv itself under attack, Israel faces a dilemma: retaliate directly against Iran and risk a regional conflagration, or absorb the blow and risk appearing weak to its own people and to its allies. This is the trap Iran has set, forcing Israel into a position where every option carries profound risks. That is what makes this move bold. It corners Israel into choices it would prefer to avoid, and it does so in front of a global audience. Finally, what makes this strike resonate so profoundly is the precedent it sets. Once the taboo of directly striking Tel Aviv has been broken, it becomes easier for future strikes to follow. Iran has shown not only that it can hit the heart of Israel, but that it is willing to do so, regardless of the consequences. That changes the strategic calculus for everyone: Israel, the United States, the Gulf states, even global markets that depend on Middle Eastern stability. The boldness lies not just in the act, but in the message it carries. The era of indirect confrontation is over, and the war can be brought to Israel's doorstep at will. This is a new Middle East, one where Iran is not playing defense but offense, and where Tel Aviv, once considered untouchable, is now squarely in the crosshairs. Israel's image of invulnerability has long been one of its greatest assets, carefully crafted through decades of military superiority, technological advancement, and unwavering support from the United States. The strike on Tel Aviv does more than cause physical damage. It pierces through that image and reveals cracks that many thought impossible. For years, Israel has prided itself on being the fortress of the Middle East, the nation whose citizens could live under the protective dome of advanced defense systems, while their neighbors struggled with instability and war. That perception has been the backbone of Israeli deterrence, convincing adversaries that any attempt to attack would not only fail, but would invite devastating retaliation. Yet today, after Iranian missiles struck Tel Aviv, that aura of invulnerability stands shaken, perhaps irreparably. This is not simply about military technology being bypassed, though that in itself is a critical factor. The Iron Dome, Arrow, and David's sling have been celebrated as symbols of modern warfare's defensive triumphs, praised in Western capitals and showcased in joint U.S.-Israeli defense projects. Billions of dollars have gone into perfecting these shields, and their successes have been marketed globally as proof that Israel could withstand whatever was thrown at it. But when footage emerges of explosions over Tel Aviv, when sirens wail in the heart of Israel's cosmopolitan hub, and when citizens huddle in shelters in the very city they believed untouchable, the myth is punctured. The psychological shift is profound. If Tel Aviv is not safe, nowhere is safe. And that realization changes the conversation, not only inside Israel, but across the region. The invulnerability narrative has also been central to Israel's diplomacy. It reassured allies that Israel could handle itself, that its stability was unshakable, and that investing in Israeli partnerships was always a safe bet. It also acted as a deterrent to enemies, convincing them that their efforts would be futile. But Iran's strike shatters that confidence. Suddenly, regional players, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to Hamas in Gaza, see a precedent. If Iran can land a strike on Tel Aviv, why not others? If the defenses can be penetrated once, perhaps they can be penetrated again. That creeping doubt undermines deterrence, and deterrence is what has allowed Israel to avoid direct large-scale confrontations for decades. Domestically, the loss of invulnerability carries even greater consequences. The Israeli public has long tolerated the burdens of military service, high defense spending, and the sacrifices of endless conflict under the promise that the state could keep them safe. When that promise is broken, the public turns inward, demanding accountability. Questions arise: how did this happen? Why did the defenses fail? Who bears responsibility? And perhaps most dangerously for the government, people begin to ask whether their leadership is truly capable of navigating the challenges ahead. In a society as politically divided as Israel's today, that questioning can quickly spiral into unrest, further weakening the state's ability to project unity against external threats. The symbolism of Tel Aviv being struck cannot be overstated. Jerusalem may hold religious and historical significance, but Tel Aviv is Israel's beating economic and cultural heart. It is the hub of global business, the headquarters of multinational corporations, the city that projects Israel's modern identity to the world. A strike here is not merely an attack on infrastructure, it is an assault on Israel's international brand. Investors who see instability in Tel Aviv hesitate to commit. Tourists who once flocked to its beaches now reconsider. Diplomatic partners who counted on Israel's stability begin to question whether their ties come with new risks. Iran, by hitting Tel Aviv, understood this perfectly. The damage inflicted extends far beyond the physical. It seeps into finance, diplomacy, and culture. This is why the shattering of invulnerability is so destabilizing. Israel has always leveraged its military might not just to win wars, but to prevent them. The understanding that Israel was untouchable kept many conflicts from erupting into full-scale confrontations. That understanding has now been broken, and with it, the region enters an era of heightened uncertainty. Will Israel escalate dramatically to restore its deterrence? Will its enemies become emboldened to test the defenses further? Or will the cracks in its image encourage diplomatic alternatives once thought impossible? These are not abstract questions. They are the immediate dilemmas created by the fall of Israel's protective myth. The hook here is that the strike has done more than just challenge Israel militarily. It has challenged the very foundation of its national identity and global standing. For a state that has defined itself by its ability to withstand existential threats, this moment is nothing short of existential itself. The world is now watching Israel, not just to see how it responds with force, but how it responds with narrative. Can it rebuild the confidence of its citizens and its allies, or will this be remembered as the day when the illusion of invulnerability was finally broken? Beyond the missiles, Beyond the explosions and beyond the firepower lies the deeper truth of Iran's strike on Tel Aviv. This was psychological and political warfare at its finest. Iran understands that wars are not won only by the destruction of infrastructure or the number of casualties inflicted. Wars are won when the enemy's confidence is shaken, when its people begin to question their security, and when the very legitimacy of its leadership is brought under scrutiny. By striking Tel Aviv, Iran has sought to enter the minds of Israelis, to create doubt in their institutions, and to remind the region that power is not measured solely in weapons, but in perception. That is why this moment is so pivotal. It demonstrates that psychological impact can rival, or even outweigh, the physical. For decades, Israel has built its deterrence not only on the strength of its army, but on the conviction of its citizens that they are protected. The safe bubble of Tel Aviv represented more than geography. It symbolized a sense of security that gave Israelis the confidence to live normal lives in an abnormal region. Cafes stayed full, businesses thrived, and culture flourished, even as rockets fell on border towns. That sense of separation between conflict and daily life was the foundation of psychological resilience. Iran's strike deliberately pierced that bubble. By forcing Tel Aviv residents into shelters, by turning the cosmopolitan heart of Israel into a front line, Iran delivered a message more powerful than any press release: the war can reach you, no matter how safe you once felt. The political ramifications are equally significant. Every government in Israel, regardless of ideology, has promised its citizens security as the non-negotiable guarantee of the state. Security is the core of the Israeli social contract. When it falters, politics become volatile. In a nation already divided by intense internal debates on judicial reform, religious versus secular tensions, and policies toward Palestinians, the breach of security adds another explosive ingredient. Opposition leaders can now frame the government as incompetent or unprepared, while those in power are compelled to respond with strength to restore legitimacy. In this sense, Iran is not only striking Israel's defenses, but striking at the heart of its political stability. It knows that leaders under domestic pressure often make rash decisions, and rash decisions play into the hands of the adversary. Internationally, the psychological dimension of this strike also reshapes perceptions. For years, allies of Israel have viewed it as the bastion of Western stability in the Middle East. The little Sparta that could fend off enemies on all sides with unmatched resilience. By successfully striking Tel Aviv, Iran has shown the world that Israel's vulnerabilities are real. For regional adversaries, this is empowering. For neutral states weighing diplomatic relations, it raises questions about whether Israel can still project the same confidence. And for the United States and European allies, it creates uncomfortable dilemmas. How much more support must they extend to maintain Israel's credibility? And how sustainable is that support in the long run? Psychological warfare also works on the level of symbolism. Tel Aviv, unlike Jerusalem, is not primarily about religion or history. It is about modernity, progress, and global integration. Striking it sends a symbolic warning. Iran is not merely targeting Israel's military assets or its contested territories. It is targeting its very identity as a modern, thriving state. This is why the strike reverberates so powerfully in global consciousness. News of missiles landing near Tel Aviv is not simply a report from another conflict zone. It is a disruption of the image Israel has projected to the world. An image of normalcy amidst chaos. Iran has weaponized symbolism, turning Tel Aviv into a battlefield of perception as much as geography. The hook here is not only the shock of the strike itself, but the long tail of doubt it creates. Every siren, every shelter drill, every hint of vulnerability now carries more weight than before. Citizens do not easily forget the moment when their sense of safety was shattered. Investors do not easily forget when stability was called into question. Politicians do not easily forget when they were forced into defensive explanations rather than confident assertions. Iran has planted a seed of uncertainty, and uncertainty is corrosive. It eats away slowly but relentlessly at the foundations of power. By using psychological and political warfare, Iran is playing a long game. It does not need to destroy Tel Aviv to achieve its goal. It only needs to make Tel Aviv feel vulnerable. It does not need to topple Israel's government. It only needs to strain it under the weight of doubt and division. And it does not need to match Israel's military might dollar for dollar. It only needs to prove that Israel's shield can be pierced. That is the brilliance and the danger of this strategy. It recognizes that power is as much about belief as it is about weaponry, and in this strike, Iran has forced Israel and the world to believe something newsy. Invulnerability is an illusion. The strike on Tel Aviv is not just a military event. It is an economic tremor that ripples far beyond the Middle East, shaking markets, trade networks, and the wallets of ordinary citizens across the globe. In modern warfare, the battlefield is not only land, sea, and air. It is the stock exchange, the oil markets, and the shipping routes that knit together the global economy. Iran understands this reality, and Israel cannot ignore it. By escalating the conflict to the point where Tel Aviv is under direct attack, Iran has introduced uncertainty into one of the most sensitive economic regions in the world. And uncertainty is the enemy of stability. Energy markets are the first to feel the shockwaves. The moment reports of the strike surfaced, oil prices began to climb. Traders react not to what has already happened, but to what might happen. And the fear of a wider regional conflict sends a chill through the global economy. The Middle East is still the heartbeat of global oil supply, and any disruption, whether real or anticipated, immediately affects prices. For countries dependent on imports, that means higher costs at the pump, rising transportation expenses, and pressure on industries that rely heavily on fuel. A family in Paris, a truck driver in New Delhi, or a factory owner in Lagos may not follow the politics of Iran and Israel closely, but they feel the effects in their daily expenses. In this way, a missile strike in Tel Aviv becomes a tax on the world. Financial markets respond in equally dramatic fashion. Investors, faced with geopolitical uncertainty, pull capital from risky assets and flood into so-called safe havens, U.S. Treasury bonds, gold, and other commodities. Stock markets in Europe and Asia fluctuate wildly as traders weigh the risk of supply chain disruptions, shipping delays, and potential sanctions. For Israel itself, the costs are immediate and painful. Tel Aviv is not only a city under fire, it is Israel's financial hub, home to banks, technology firms, and investment centers. A strike here rattles investor confidence and raises questions about whether Israel can still serve as a stable anchor for global business in the region. The blow to perception alone can have long-term consequences as multinational firms reassess the risks of maintaining operations in a country now proven vulnerable. The strike also affects trade flows in a way that rarely makes headlines but always shapes outcomes. Much of the world's commerce passes through choke points like the Strait of Hormuz and the Suez Canal. If conflict spreads, or if Iran leverages its geographic position to disrupt these arteries, global shipping could face delays and costs that ripple across supply chains. What begins as a missile strike in Tel Aviv could translate into higher prices for goods on store shelves in Berlin or Chicago months later. Businesses already stretched by inflation and supply shortages from other crises now face another layer of unpredictability. Economically, Israel itself must grapple with the spiraling costs of defense. Each interception by the Iron Dome comes at an enormous price, tens of thousands of dollars per missile, while Iran spends a fraction to launch its drones and rockets. This imbalance is not new, but the direct strike on Tel Aviv highlights its unsustainable nature. To defend itself, Israel must spend more, and to spend more, it must either raise taxes, cut social spending, or rely on increased aid from allies like the United States. In every scenario, the burden falls on ordinary citizens, either through reduced services, heavier financial obligations, or the social consequences of dependence on foreign support. What makes this moment particularly striking is the way it ties together ordinary lives around the globe with the decisions of generals and politicians. A teacher in Brazil may never set foot in the Middle East, but her grocery bill rises because of oil price spikes tied to the strike. A small business in Kenya faces higher shipping costs because carriers raise rates in response to potential instability near the Suez. A retiree in Germany sees their savings fluctuate because stock markets tremble under the weight of uncertainty. These are the invisible threads that connect war to everyday existence, and they remind us that in the 21st century, there is no such thing as a local conflict. The hook here is not just that Iran struck Tel Aviv, it is that this strike instantly translated into an economic event felt worldwide. Iran has demonstrated that it can impose costs not only on Israel, but on the global system itself, raising the stakes for every major power invested in stability. It shows that war today is fought not only with missiles, but with market reactions, not only with soldiers, but with traders and consumers caught in the crossfire of geopolitics. And for Israel, the danger is not only the destruction inflicted by its enemies, but the erosion of confidence among its allies, investors, and citizens who depend on the illusion of security. A war that destabilizes the economy is not confined to borders. It travels silently, invisibly, through the veins of global finance, touching everyone, everywhere, all at once. The strike on Tel Aviv does not exist in isolation. It raises the terrifying prospect of a wider regional war that could pull the entire Middle East into a spiral of confrontation. When a city as central and symbolic as Tel Aviv is hit, the stakes are no longer about a single exchange between two adversaries. They expand to encompass the larger strategic order of the region. The danger lies not only in how Israel might respond, but in how other players, both regional and global, will interpret the event and move to protect their own interests. In this sense, the strike is a spark tossed into a field of dry grass, and the question is how far the flames will spread. Israel cannot allow such a direct hit on its heartland to go unanswered. Its leaders are under enormous pressure from the public to retaliate decisively. But retaliation against Iran itself risks a dangerous escalation, and that possibility drags in the United States almost by default. Washington has long been committed to Israel's defense, bound by both political necessity and military alliances. An Israeli strike on Iran would almost certainly provoke Iranian countermeasures, and American forces stationed across the Middle East, from bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and beyond, would become targets. What begins as a bilateral confrontation could quickly transform into a U.S.-Iran conflict with unpredictable consequences for global security. At the same time, other regional powers cannot simply stand by. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf monarchies have historically viewed Iran as a rival for influence, fearing its ability to stir unrest among Shia populations in their own countries. A bold Iranian move like striking Tel Aviv forces them to reassess their security. Do they remain aligned with the United States and Israel, hoping to contain Tehran, or do they hedge, seeking accommodation with Iran to avoid becoming the next battleground? Turkey, too, sees an opportunity in this moment, positioning itself as both mediator and power broker, ready to exploit instability to expand its influence. Each of these decisions adds complexity, heightening the risk that one misstep or miscalculation could set off a chain reaction none of the actors can control. For groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen, Iran's strike serves as both inspiration and invitation. If Iran is willing to go this far, why should they hold back? Hezbollah possesses tens of thousands of rockets capable of saturating Israel's defenses, and a coordinated offensive from multiple fronts would stretch Israel's resources thin. The Houthis have already demonstrated their reach with drone and missile attacks on Saudi and Emirati targets, and their alignment with Tehran suggests they could easily expand their targets to include Israel directly. The more these proxies are emboldened, the greater the chance that Israel finds itself fighting not one enemy but many, across multiple fronts, in a conflict that feels uncomfortably like encirclement. Beyond the region, great powers watch with unease. Russia, tied to Iran through cooperation in Syria, may see advantage in a distracted West, using Middle Eastern chaos to ease pressure on its own conflicts elsewhere. China, heavily invested in Gulf energy supplies, has no interest in a regional war that disrupts oil flows, but also sees an opportunity to present itself as a stabilizing diplomatic force in contrast to American militarism. These calculations mean that the strike on Tel Aviv does not merely threaten to inflame the Middle East. It risks dragging the world's most powerful nations into a contest of influence, if not direct involvement. What makes the possibility of escalation so frightening is how fragile the boundaries of restraint have become. Every actor has red lines, but those lines are neither clear nor consistent. Israel insists it cannot tolerate attacks on its civilian centers, yet Iran insists it will not allow Israeli strikes on its territory to go unanswered. The United States insists it will defend Israel, but its appetite for another war in the Middle East is limited. Gulf states insist they want stability, yet their rivalries with Iran keep them entangled. These overlapping but contradictory positions create a combustible environment where one miscalculation, one missile landing in the wrong place, one misinterpreted maneuver could ignite a firestorm. The hook here is that the strike on Tel Aviv is not just a single event. It is a trigger. It exposes how interconnected the Middle East really is, how quickly a localized clash can expand into something much larger. Each actor, pursuing its own interests, may think it can manage escalation, but history tells us otherwise. The First World War began with a single assassination, and within weeks, Europe was ablaze. The same risk exists here. A strike that begins with Iran and Israel could end with half a dozen nations locked into a conflict none of them truly wanted. That is the peril of this moment. The strike on Tel Aviv is not just about missiles. It is about the fragility of an entire region and the terrifying ease with which one act of defiance can spiral into a regional war with global consequences. The strike on Tel Aviv signals the beginning of a new strategic era in the Middle East, one that will reshape alliances, redefine deterrence, and challenge the very assumptions that have underpinned regional stability for decades. For much of modern history, Israel has held the upper hand militarily, relying on superior technology, intelligence capabilities, and the backing of the United States to maintain dominance. Its neighbors, even when hostile, were often forced to calibrate their actions under the weight of this imbalance. But Iran's bold strike demonstrates that the region has entered a multipolar phase where no single power can claim unchallenged superiority. This shift is not temporary. It is the foundation of a new reality. Iran has shown that it is willing to move beyond proxy warfare, and by doing so, it has recalibrated the rules of engagement. The fact that Tel Aviv, Israel's most vital urban center, can be struck undermines the notion that Israel's advanced defense systems make it untouchable. This erodes a psychological advantage Israel has relied on for decades. The very act of forcing Israelis to imagine a future where their cities are vulnerable to sustained attacks changes the calculus of deterrence. It is no longer about whether Israel can win wars. It is about whether it can prevent them from happening in the first place, and that prevention is becoming increasingly difficult. This new era also brings with it a reordering of alliances. The United States remains Israel's closest ally, but its willingness and capacity to underwrite Israel's security indefinitely is now being tested. Washington is stretched thin by its commitments in Europe and Asia, and domestic pressure against endless entanglement in Middle Eastern conflicts continues to grow. If America's support wavers even slightly, Israel will face the unthinkable prospect of needing to adjust its strategies in ways that reduce reliance on outside powers. At the same time, Iran's strike will embolden other regional actors who sense that U.S. dominance in the Middle East is no longer as overwhelming as it once was. This perception alone could accelerate shifts in regional diplomacy, with countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Turkey recalibrating their positions between Washington, Tehran, and Beijing. What makes this moment particularly striking is how Iran's strategy exposes the fragility of old frameworks. For decades, deterrence was based on the assumption that any adversary striking at the heart of Israel would face immediate, devastating retaliation. Yet the strike on Tel Aviv happened, and Israel now faces a dilemma. retaliate in kind and risk regional war, or hold back and risk looking weak. Either option breaks the old formula. This demonstrates that deterrence in its traditional form is collapsing, and a new, more complex game of psychological, political, and economic signaling is taking its place. Iran has proven that by choosing timing, symbolism, and precision carefully, a weaker state can rewrite the rules against a stronger one. The global implications of this new strategic reality cannot be ignored. The Middle East sits at the crossroads of energy flows, trade routes, and ideological battles. When the balance of power shifts here, the ripple effects extend to Europe, Asia, and beyond. Investors and governments alike must now contend with a region where no player can fully guarantee stability. Oil markets are more volatile, shipping routes more precarious, and diplomatic initiatives more urgent. This instability creates opportunities for other global powers. Russia, already aligned with Iran in certain theaters, may see a chance to expand its influence. China, deeply dependent on energy from the Gulf, may push itself forward as a mediator, presenting an alternative to US-led diplomacy. In short, the strike on Tel Aviv has opened the door for a reconfiguration of global involvement in the region. At the heart of this new era is a profound shift in perception. Power is no longer measured only by weapons stockpiles or defense budgets. It is measured by the ability to change the narrative, to disrupt confidence, and to prove that no state, however well armed, is beyond reach. Iran's strike has done all three. The hook here is not just the physical impact of the attack, but the symbolic transformation it represents. The old order, where Israel's dominance was unquestioned, has ended. In its place is a new landscape of uncertainty, where every actor, from regional powers to global superpowers, must reassess how they engage, how they deter, and how they survive in a Middle East that has been fundamentally reshaped. So, my friends, let me close with this. Do not be distracted by the headlines alone. Iran strikes Tel Aviv is dramatic, yes, but the real story is the transformation beneath it. The old order, where one state dominated militarily and economically, is eroding. A new multipolar struggle is emerging, and it will not stop at Israel's borders. It will ripple across oil markets, global trade, and international politics. The question is not whether this strategy will change the game. It already has. The question is, how prepared are we to understand it, to confront it, and to learn from it before the costs spiral out of control? Thank you.